Good afternoon. This talk is about the future of war and peace. I will be discussing some works on causal analysis in the process of doing this, but this is a preview of some of the work that I'm doing on this subject using some recent work on artificial intelligence. So in this lecture, I will discuss basically some of the other work that has been done in computer science and also in automated warfare. I think most people are familiar with drones. They have made big news, and justifiably so, because it seems a bit warlike anyway, although it is war, to basically attack unarmed people, in most cases, from above, using a remotely controlled vehicle, in some cases in Iraq or Afghanistan or Pakistan. The control is actually in some place like Florida. So this is a bit science fiction-like, but it is happening and requires some attention. And it may be put under the general title of global crisis in the cyber age. So what exactly is going on? To give the punchline away right at the beginning, we can say that the crisis, including the crisis involving drones, reflect deep socioeconomic and political contradictions, leading towards a semi-permanent malaise for all our societies on this planet. Under such circumstances, it seems almost impossible to find a path towards global peace. Yet, we must raise the question, how can we find such a path in the midst of these old and some newfangled local and global crises? So we need to really understand by asking the causal question as deeply as we can. What are the deeper causes of the phenomenon connected with drones? But for that, we first need to come to the subject of causes. And one of the leading computer scientists, Judea Pearl, whose son Daniel Pearl, by the way, was a victim of religious fundamentalists in Pakistan, and in a remarkable act of spirituality and forgiveness, the Pearls, the father and the mother, really have dedicated themselves to the cause of peace even more wholeheartedly than before. The book by Judea Pearl that I want to mention is called The Book of Why. And there he actually discusses how to think more deeply and answer all kinds of counterfactual questions. And we can then translate some of that way of asking questions to asking questions about automated weapons systems and modern or postmodern warfare. The second book that I want to mention is actually by somebody who fought in Afghanistan. His name is Paul Shar, and his book is called Army of None. We must also be aware of something else. As we see forces of nationalism growing everywhere in the world, we need to remember something that Abraham Lincoln said very wisely in the last century. Abraham Lincoln, during one of the bloodiest periods in American history, he asked people to remember that there is a need for disenthralling of American mind. By that he meant not to become too aggressive and warlike and always blame other people for your own problems, and also to resist the move of thinking that whatever group you are part of is the best, since creation. So remembering that, we claim, or I would claim and hope to convince you, that ordinary citizens who have suffered greatly and continue to suffer will recognize their creative potential even in the face of tremendous present odds against peace and civilization. A better world is indeed possible through creative people's cosmopolitan internationalist movements from below. For this, however, understanding causalities, as I said before, especially the deeper socioeconomic and political causes in both war and peace, will be crucial. Particularly today, much hype regarding thinking machines has resulted in much obscure thinking about human beings and their thinking. So thinking machines, the slogan of thinking machines rather, has completely obscured thinking about human beings. Prospects for deep learning by machines have immobilized deeper thinking by us humans. This is both dangerous and irresponsible. Fortunately, both these books alert us, though somewhat unevenly, about such dangers. Pearl, in particular, makes a good case for clear causal thinking that can open the path towards a cautious optimism. So I won't spend too much time discussing these books because the issues are much more important. But Pearl's most striking idea is that of a moral robot of the future. As he sees it, once we have built a moral robot, many apocalyptic visions start to recede into irrelevance. There is no reason to refrain from building machines that are better able to distinguish good from evil than we are, better able to resist temptation, better able to assign guilt and credit. We will be able to depend on our machines for a clear-eyed and causally sound sense of justice. We will be able to learn how our free will software works and how it manages to hide the secrets from us. Such a thinking machine will be a wonderful companion to our species and would truly qualify as AI's first and best gift to humanity. Indeed, this is true, but it seems quite utopian right now. And we do have seemingly permanent wars in several parts of the world, particularly in Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan. But such visionary thoughts were very much a part of a democratic socialist vision, even as the world saw great instability and violence in the 1920s, 1930s, and World War II. The problem with Pearl's vision and also the limited moral understanding, which is excellent, that Shar offers us, is that they do not consider the deeper causes of the global system causing these problems, deeper aspects, that is, and those causal connections, once understood, actually lead us in the direction of democratic socialist systems for the future. Shar is definitely more of a realist in the sense the word is used in international relations, contrary to the crude official realism often driving US and other aggressive capitalist countries' foreign policies and military interventions. Classical realists from Thucydides to Morgenthau, continuing on to the 21st century, have been realistic about the darker aspects of power and have drawn attention to the dangers of war and the necessity to prevent wars realistically. However, most conventional theorists of realism in international politics could not think through the global and local problems of making a transition from capitalism to a higher form of global society. A proper history of the rise of fascism, Second World War, Cold War, and post-Cold War chaos will show a world in fiery ruins. It was no small achievement to rebuild war-torn societies and the victories of the decolonization of movements. But it was difficult even then, and it is difficult now, to imagine a future that animated the visions of Neurath, who was among these avant-garde thinkers of the 1920s and 1930s, and other thinkers like him. However, it is necessary more than ever to rethink the theory of transition from capitalism in many context-specific ways and to learn from the partial successes and many failures of 20th century socialist experiments. It is productive to read the other book, a book by Shar, in this light. The 6 parts of this meticulously researched and courageously written and well-argued book lead the reader through the labyrinths of modern military technological development, including artificial intelligence and the seemingly endless high technology dependent wars in the 21st century in particular. Among the many contributions of this book are the discussions of diverse types of weapon systems, starting with the quasi-autonomous types like the mines to TASMs and even more advanced projected autonomous weapon system now in the research and development stage. But even more important, in my view, are discussions about the role of the professional personnel with respect to combat, not just instrumentally, but also from the point of view of soldiers as moral agents. Here, the personal combat experience of the author comes to the fore, and there is a especially gripping episode in Afghanistan described in chapter 17, when the author had to decide whether an Afghan man was simply a goatherd or a Taliban militant from the top of a hill. It was a life or death decision. Fortunately, the man turned out to be a non-combatant. But this is indeed a moral dilemma in warfare that depends highly on machine learning kind of stuff. With a situation like this, the moral dilemma should be clear. With a moral autonomous weapon system, this dilemma can be addressed, but here is the problem of wars and military industrial complexes running ahead of a morally oriented scientific research or scientific approach like pearls to artificial intelligence. The so-called weapons of using artificial intelligence will be better at reasoning and identifying cause and effect relations, but will it be capable of moral decision making as the author was able to make in the battlefield in Afghanistan? The political precondition for such scientific advance towards a morally sensitive technological system is to move towards a more open democratic polity everywhere and to deepen this process over time. I have discussed this in my various works on technology systems, of which the autonomous weapon system is clearly a subset. The same analysis from the ethics point of view can be applied. Without a fully deliberative democratic approach for the common good and application of do no harm principle, autonomous weapon systems can and most probably will indeed be dangerously destructive. The political economist and ethicist can point out that the current global neoliberal capitalism is completely dependent on imperial finance capital and imperialist global politics and military production in both the center and periphery. This is where the second book, the book by Shar, falls short in spite of its humanist intuitions. Another problem is that not being a technical analyst of the systems, especially AI systems, Shar is not able to assess completely the potentials and dangers of neural networks and deep learning with many hidden layers. As a researcher who, along with my co-authors, pioneered the application of neural network learning with many hidden layers to a fuzzy set theoretic framework to study financial crisis, among other things, I can assess the current claims regarding big data and deep learning as being largely hyperbolic claims. Most importantly, emergent phenomena in complex systems are very poorly understood. Being a technological optimist, I think we are probably 30 to 50 years from real breakthrough here. Till then, or perhaps even then, we should be careful and practice a version of the precautionary principle. Let me just wrap up by a few other global political economy and moral economy observations. The successes of 1980s in forcing an anti-people imperialist neoliberal agenda led the US policy pundits in particular to believe that a deregulated, largely privatized economy could be sustained indefinitely. The stock market booms and accumulation of private wealth at the top seem to be proof of the efficacy of these ill-conceived policies. The dismantling of public institutions of economic management, coupled with the ideological incantations of the virtues of the so-called free market, led to a smug acceptance of the kind of situation that prevailed before the Great Depression of the 1930s. Alan Greenspan's gamble of easy money policy by the Fed to save the real estate market in the US from collapsing eventually resulted in the subprime debacle. The rest, sadly, is now all too recent history, and that's the legacy that we are living under right now. The historic electoral victory of Barack Obama created high expectations of progressive change in the US and the world. As a president, Obama certainly has shown some courage with a vision and the same organizing capacity that helped him score his unprecedented victory. Unfortunately, the $787 billion stimulus package really could have been used much better if it were distributed to the poorer segments of the population, but that didn't happen. Also, much of the regulation that would have been necessary was not really passed through, although there was plenty of good advice to go around. So it's a failure really of the political system. And the point about deepening democracy certainly, I think, has special force in this particular instance. We know that in 2016 a reversal took place, but even if the Democratic candidate won, I wonder whether the neoliberal policies would have been dismantled and whether a regulatory regime that could prevent crisis would have been created. So these are questions that obviously we cannot answer, but given what we know about the Democratic candidate who lost, probably we couldn't be too optimistic on this score either. But right now we are dealing with basically a very unpredictable situation where anything can happen, and much hype is in the air about the military superiority and military magic, in fact, that US is capable of doing. And this is highly dangerous and basically an illusion. So after decades of arrogant abuse of political, military, and economic power, the US ruling class, the leading ruling class in the globally integrated network of finance capital, in particular, faces an uphill task to undo the errors of the past and to build for a better future for all. The good news is that with the determination of a genuine flowering of democracy here, and with the discontinuation of US imperial strategy ahead, two big ifs, but possibilities, the present crisis can be addressed from a long-run perspective of creating a prosperous, sustainable, green economy globally. This transformation can begin in the US with a green public investment program and a disengagement from imperialist practices abroad. However, defeating the neo-fascist movements globally, deepening democracy everywhere, and building movements globally for a transition to ecologically sustainable, peaceful societies must be on our strategic agenda. However, these are precisely the points that are missing from the two books I mentioned earlier. Intuitively, both the authors seem to be aware of the dangers and yet unable to offer a clear causal analysis that indicates deep causal learning about the nature of our global political economic system with its tensions and contradictions. If they did this type of dialectical analysis, it would have been clear that disengagement from war and march towards peace will be very difficult given the underlying political economy of imperialism led by the US capital and its capitalist state apparatus. Add to this the current political situation in both the US and the rest of the world, and the situation might seem well-nigh hopeless. However, as intuitively many people will affirm, a truly synthetic combination of intellectual advancement in AI and the moral recognition and appropriate institution building for peace can prevent an Armageddon. To such excellent humanistic intuition, we can add a complementary analysis of global political economy and the scope for social movements to get us to a saner, safer world beyond the madness now prevailing. For this to happen, a global workers' movement together with allies from all sectors of the global society for a 21st century democratic socialism will be essential. Only such a broad-based, morally and politically aware organized movement can reverse the current situation, leading us towards a war that will be technologically more advanced and more destructive than ever before. With this welcome but difficult reversal of imperialist practices, the march towards the progressive and humane global cities of the future envisioned by Neurath and others in the 1920s and 30s can finally begin. This means that we must abandon our Faustian quest and humbly learn not just to be smart with data and technology, but also wise with wisdom from Talmud that Pearl quotes, as well as similar wisdom from our collective global cultural resources. In this process, and only through such a process of a global construction of non-violent and peaceful socioeconomic, political, symbolic institutions, will we become the trustees and not the destroyers of our small but precious blue planet. Thank you.